What's wrong with the run game? What's wrong with the defense? What's wrong with you personally? It's Twitter Tuesday here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello. Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also find this show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by SimpliSafe Home Security. With Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe, 24/7 monitoring agents capture evidence to accurately verify a threat for faster police response. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Visit simplisafe.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more. Today's episode is Twitter Tuesday. That means I'm taking your questions. If you have a question for me, you can always leave it in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, you can send it to me at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. Send an email to LockedOnVikingsPodcast@gmail.com or fill out the Google form in the show notes. The first one that I am answering today comes from Hank Lee, who says, is there anything schematically that can fix the running game, or is it a matter of reserves filling holes and everything being worse because of who is playing? So there is some of that. I got a similar question about like how bad would it be if we had Darisaw and Harrison Smith and blah blah blah. How they dealt with not having Harrison Smith was actually a really interesting idea, and I think they got burned on it more than they probably thought they would. But defensively, with that, it's really interesting stuff. I'll probably get into it tomorrow. With the run game, yes, having Darisaw and Bradbury back would be huge. And in this particular game, in the Lions game, there, like, you could really feel that impact. But there's a bunch of stuff with this. There's a tweet from Alec Lewis that I'm actually going to do a Patreon video about, patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL. About all of the negative like TFLs and 0-yard runs. They've had more than anybody in the league. With Darisaw out, like, leads the league. With Darisaw in, it's not nearly as bad. And so I basically took all of the Blake Brandel ones and said, okay, is it just this dude getting killed? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to look into it. I'll get back to you on that. But what I saw in this Lions game was like, okay, so the way zone works is the hard jobs kind of go to who can do them in the moment. And those decisions aren't made for you ahead of time. They are sort of a read and react thing. If you think of two linemen that are supposed to double team a defensive tackle, and then one of them is supposed to climb up to a linebacker and block a linebacker. It's called a combo block, and it's a staple of zone. So just think about that like pod of 4 players, that 2v2. Who climbs up to the linebacker depends on where the linebacker goes. If the guy on the right is supposed to climb up to the linebacker, but the linebacker goes to the left, obviously that's not going to work. So you have to be able to kind of on the fly switch that up. And what that sort of ends up becoming is, if there is somebody in the second level you have to go block, it's like whoever goes and gets him is the guy that can. And when that's Bradbury, he can a lot. Or when you are in a combo with Bradbury, you can a lot because Bradbury can get that reach and you can trust it. Not so much with Schlottmann. And sort of the same thing if you're in a combo with Blake Brandel, who struggled to get out into the second level. When I saw failed run plays, it was those two guys like a huge amount of the time. There were some pass pro issues with Ingram. There were a couple of particularly embarrassing moments with Ingram. Pass pro issues kind of across the board. By no means am I absolving the rest of the line here, but the amount of plays, and I was like, who screwed that up? 64 and 65 came up a lot. Kyler Pekarek asks, I know people are calling for Ed to go, or at least relieve his play calling duties. I'd assume they'd go to Pettine, but isn't Pettine's scheme and play calling the same as Ed's? Yeah, that's the whole thing that I've been kind of saying. Nothing changes if you go to Pettine. And Pettine, I mean, ask a Packers fan if you know what they think of Mike Pettine, and you'll probably get some colorful answers. But yeah, if you get rid of Ed, you just have the same thing with a different bald dude doing it. It's not going to fix anything. And that was my whole point yesterday. A lot of people seem to think that that means, the defense is fine and nothing needs to change. No, of course not. The defense is not fine. Things need to get fixed, whether that's player just getting healthy, whether that's a change in the way that they call it, a change in the way that they structure it. I have suggestions for a change in the way that they defend the run, although they seem to have already taken that because the Lions game actually had a lot more of that. So yeah, there's stuff that you can advocate they do, whether Ed Donatell's in charge or Pettin, or whether Kevin O'Connell decides he's going to be the one taking the whole defense under his reign. It doesn't matter, because they're in the same structure and they only have access to the tools that their players can execute, and that's where we're at right now. They can't cover, they can't call middle of the field close stuff as much as I want them to, because Duke Shelley would have to cover one-on-one, and he can't do that. You just can't trust him to do that. And it would be stupid to trust him to do that. Maybe if you have a healthy Dantzler, you have Patrick Peterson, maybe you can get away with that. If you've got a little bit more depth, you can get away with that a little bit more. But it kind of seems like no matter what the Vikings call, they're getting burned right now for different reasons. And you're just kind of picking which problem you're going to have that ruins you today. Which thing's going to be it today? Josh has a bit of a longer one. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read the crux of it because it's a good question. He says, while I completely agree with what you've been saying the last few weeks about there being a learning curve / growing pains that come with the new defensive scheme, how do I reconcile that with the fact that other teams also made DC / scheme changes this offseason, but are managing not to have a bottom 5 defense? And then he brought up a couple of examples: Broncos, Ravens, and Bucks. 3 examples. A quick Google shows 12 new teams having new DCs in 2022, with the results ranging from pretty good to awful. And the good teams are Broncos, Ravens, and Bucks. So those 3 teams, at least, I don't know what the other teams are off the top of my head, but at least with those 3 teams, none of them changed to schemes. The Ravens promoted a guy that's been in their organization for a decade. The Broncos went from Vic Fangio to a guy off of Brandon Staley's staff, who is part of the Vic Fangio tree. So it's kind of like going from Zimmer to Jonathan Gannon, maybe. And the Bucks just promoted their coordinator to head coach. So that's clearly going to have continuity there. So you're not learning the entire new thing. Let me put it this way. Going from Fangio to Ejiro Evero in Denver, it's kind of like if you were a baker and you make cakes and you made vanilla cakes for your whole career, and then a new person took over and said, you're going to make chocolate cakes now. And you go, oh, okay, well, that's a little different. It's still cakes, but it's a different flavor, different recipe. You're going to have to get used to it. Maybe a little bit of learning. You have to adjust to something. But you do have a lot of a base of knowledge to work with there. And then another person comes in later and says, you're actually making cherry pies now. And oh my, that's a whole new thing. I got to learn how to make pie crust. That's a new thing. I got to learn how to deal with fruit instead of sweet. Like, that's all way different stuff, right? That's sort of the difference here. The Broncos are going from vanilla cake to chocolate cake. The Vikings are going from vanilla cake to baklava. Like, it's a totally different world. JW says 2 seed in jeopardy. Absolutely. Yeah. The 49ers are a game behind the Vikings and they have the tiebreaker. So essentially we just have, we have to tie the 49ers from here on out. If we go 2-2, they go 2-2, we go 3-1, they go 3-1. That's the outcome that we need because they will have tiebreakers on us for the 2 seed. But it's basically 2 seed or 3 seed. Falling away to the 4 seed would be a much more unlikely scenario. And Eric Thompson says they're still going to win the division at least, right? Yes. I don't care about curses. You can't curse an 8-game parlay. That's what needs to happen. The Vikings would have to lose out and the Lions would have to win out. And we're talking losing out against the Colts at home, the Giants at home, who are in a total tailspin, and then going to a very likely to be eliminated Green Bay game and a very likely to be eliminated Soldier Field Bears game. You got to win one of them. And even if you don't, the Lions also have to win out on their end. But if you want to hedge it, if you're feeling real bad, go ahead and parlay all 8 games at betonline.net. Betonline.net is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling. You can find this game, you can find future lines and stuff, and you can bet all the games. You could parlay all of those games, all 8 games, say, oh, well, I think the Vikings will lose out and the Lions would win out. I'm going to put $1 on it. And then if it does happen and the Vikings don't win the division and we all get our hearts broken, at least you hit an absolutely insane parlay. You could, of course, find all sorts of stuff, player props, live betting, not just football either, basketball, hockey, all sorts of sports, wacky things, everything under the sun too. Go to betonline.net for all of that, where the game starts. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. All the biggest stories, all the biggest games in under half an hour every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Next question on this Twitter Tuesday mailbag comes from Dr. Bops, who says, has something changed with the pass rush the last few weeks? Like Z slowing down or being less effective? Feels like we started to heat up and then in December ran out of steam. So watching the pass rush is one of the most infuriating things ever. If you just like kick it up, and you don't need to do the like tape super fancy thing, just kick up like Lions offensive highlights and then just like watch Hunter and Zadarius Smith the whole time. They just are like immediately evaporating people, and it just doesn't matter because someone's open right away. It's so infuriating. It is so frustrating. Just like kick on the game. If you have Game Pass, like condensed game, and just like key in on one of those guys, or shoot, even key in on like Dalvin Tomlinson or Kyrie Tonga or, you know, Patrick Jones. Like these guys are getting in the backfield. It is a messy, muddy pocket. The opposing quarterbacks of the Vikings are not standing back there all day with no, I remember against like 2020, in 2020, all the opponents would just sit back there all day because we just didn't have a pass rush at all with like nobody to speak of. It's not like that. They're getting the ball out fast because they can, because the coverage is just like so pitifully bad. And again, the reasons for that are just like, we just put a pin in it. I'll talk about all of the what's wrong with the defense. That is tomorrow's thing. But right now, suffice to say, the coverage is seeding separation and an open throw so fast that quarterbacks can do 5-step drop and throw a 15-yard pass in rhythm. And you can have 6 Aaron Donalds. You're never getting to the quarterback. Skull Chester says, what do you do to de-stress after a loss like yesterday's against the Lions? So I will say that loss was like not as stressful as it gets, right? Like it wasn't a game that came down to the wire and you got your heart broken, and it wasn't like the Cowboys game where it was just this total blowout. It was just kind of like a regular one. I don't know. They just lost, like teams lose. And I've seen the Vikings lose enough times in my life that it's not going to ruin my day, right? However, the Vikings are still good enough at hurting me. I think the best thing I ever got, the best piece of advice I ever got on that is to just remind yourself, and this is something that I think especially us boys, all right, deal with a little bit more. You are not an idiot for rooting for the Vikings. I know that's probably like you're going, duh, of course. But I think it's good to affirm sometimes, like, you're not stupid because you picked the Vikings. I think we sometimes feel like we go, why do I put ourselves through this, right? Why am I a Vikings fan? I didn't think they were going to win the Super Bowl. Why would I root for them? And you're like, well, you're not rooting for them because you think they're the best team in the league. You didn't pick them on their merits. You picked them because you're born into it or because you really liked them in 2009 with Brett Favre or whatever. You didn't pick them because you thought they were the best this year. If you did that, that'd be boring. You'd be a bandwagon fan and nobody would like you. So that's a good thing to remind yourself if you're getting really stressed about a loss, is that the fact that you are a fan of the Vikings is not something that is in your control, probably. And unless you want to renounce them forever, in which case, I don't know, have fun becoming a woodworker or whatever you want to do with your Sundays after. Derek Morin says, how is Hunter playing so far this year? Haven't seen much from him lately, and he seems to be back to his beginning season form. Yeah, so I kind of talked about it already with like, they're getting there, man. If you can't find Danielle Hunter, he is back to his early season form, which is he's around the quarterback all the time, and I don't know why people can't see it. Like, if you want to find Danielle Hunter, find the quarterback. He'll probably be the closest purple jersey if it's not Zadarius Smith. He gets a ton of attention, way more attention than Zadarius Smith. And that's something that's been persistent all year, is that Smith is not getting as much chip and like skill player help unless Zadarius Smith is coming off the edge, because then it's kind of more natural. And then a lot of times protections just have whoever comes off the edge gets the chip. But they are like, offenses are paying a lot of attention to Danielle Hunter. If you can't find Danielle Hunter, either look at the quarterback or look at the guy that has been touched by the most protection players, guy that's taken the most people on. There's so many plays where Daniil Hunter will like have a tight end come in that's supposed to block him, and he'll just like dust the dude instantly. And then he has a tackle and he'll dust that dude instantly too. And he'll get to the quarterback in like 2.75 seconds and the ball is already out 20 yards down the field because somebody couldn't cover that long. It's infuriating. It's absolutely, tear your hair out. F3Z says, how's Ingram coming along? Haven't noticed him much lately, so I figured that might be a good sign. He's a rookie. Here's what I'll say about Ingram. This is our weekly Ed Ingram check-in. My Ingram take is that he is, if Oli Udoh got less holding penalties right now. Take that for what you will, because one of the biggest things wrong with Udoh was those holding penalties. Ed Ingram is an improvement in that regard, but I think he has as many like, oh my God, he just got embarrassed kind of moments. But he also has a lot of those eye-popping highlights that Oli Udoh had last year. I mean, he pancaked J.J. Watt, and we all freaked out about it, right? Udoh had those moments where he'll just drive a dude off the ball or he'll just like put a dude in the ground. Ingram has a similar kind of highlight where he just will like heavy hands push someone and totally like throw a 300-pound guy out of the club. But then he'll, have moments like the pop pass where he just got totally shed and embarrassed. So the lows are low, the highs are high. But Oli Udoh also had holding penalties. Ed Ingram doesn't. That's where we're at right now. And hopefully, with a year or two more of experience, we can start to get a little bit more of the highs and start to see the lows less often. It's a matter of frequency. I've got a few more questions that I want to get to here on this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, so we will get into that. First things first, I want to talk to you about Daily Fantasy Made Easy. That is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is, I mean, look, daily fantasy is like not that fun for me, like the normal way. I don't really like putting together like a whole fantasy roster with a bunch of guys I don't have that like yearly attachment to that you do when you draft someone for a whole season. And I really don't like the idea of going into a pool of, 600,000 people and it feels like I'm buying a lottery ticket. Like it's nothing. Prize Picks takes care of all of that. I just pick 2 to 5 players that can be like my guys. So I don't have to fill out a whole roster. And it's just you against the house, just you against the house's projection. And if you can beat it, you can win up to 10 times your money. So go to prizepicks.com right now or get the app and enter promo code Locked On your first entry. You can get $100, 100% match up to $100. That means you put in $100, you get $100. Put in 50, get 50, etc. That's prizepicks.com or the PrizePicks app. Promo code Locked On. Moving on, this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Mitchell Dykstra asks, how severe does an illness have to be for a player to miss a game? Hard to imagine NFL athletes who play through injuries would get sidelined for the sniffles. This is probably going to be about like, at what point is your stamina going to be affected such that you are a liability? I think that's the calculus here. That like, it's not about, unlike with injury where there's, this risk of re-aggravating it. I think for certain like respiratory illnesses, if you put too much stress on somebody with like pneumonia, you might actually do damage. I'm not a doctor though. I don't know how that works. But that, like, if that's a concern, then that's something. But I'm more so talking about like with injury, if you have a knee injury and you put somebody out there, or concussions is a big thing, and you put somebody out there before they're ready, you run the risk of exacerbating that. But with illness, it's more about like if Harrison Smith is too sick to have the stamina required to play safety, if that is exploitable, if I feel like that is a liability and that it is more of a liability than whatever flaws are preventing Josh Metellus from being the starter, then I'll put in Josh Metellus. And I think that is the calculus. I don't think it's about as much of a player safety matter, right? It's just about like, are you a liability or can you, tough it out and play through? But it's not a matter of comfort, to be sure. Lucas VDB says, you said on Monday's show that the D especially needs to do some homework and practice. What does that look like during the offseason and playoffs? So I think it's becoming more comfortable with the reads. I think like mental reps would be really helpful. And then in the offseason in particular, the teams can't organize this. They can go back and say, hey, they can give you advice. They can say, hey, Cam Bynum, I think you really need to work on this, that, and the other thing going into the offseason. I want to see you come into camp being a little more polished at this, and that. But you're on your own for how you do it. And the team is not allowed to help you. The players can go work out with themselves. They can work out amongst each other. They can work out amongst players from other teams and stuff, but the teams themselves cannot have a say in it. So that's up to the players for how they do that. And that would probably be a different note player to player to player, depending on what your position coach told you. In the middle of the season, it's really hard to do that because like they're not sitting there going, hey, we got to figure out how to, cover man to man better. They're preparing for the Colts. They have a Colts game plan that they're coming up with today. Probably they're doing a lot of that work, coming up with what the game plan is, what they're going to emphasize, how they're going to approach the Colts. So they're just preparing for the Colts. And there's not a lot of time in between to say, okay, I'm going to like really learn how to have better footwork on my man turns, that kind of thing. So it's really hard to get that kind of stuff done in the middle of the season. But I think in terms of self-scout, I mean, Monday is the day where you look at yourself on film and you say, okay, these are the things, you identify the things that you have to try to do better next time and try to work on in the middle of practice if you get the chance to, if it happens to fit the game plan, because if you happen to be rehearsing that coverage that a lot today. Again, that's probably more of a player-to-player answer, but in general, things just need to happen faster. Things need to read faster. I want to see the mental reps maybe would be an answer for how that looks, where if your job is to read the quarterback's eyes, then shift your eyes over to the route concept, then shift back to the quarterback, like say that's your job. That should happen faster. I want you to be able to read the quarterback's eyes, see where they are, react to it, but then get your eyes off the quarterback onto your route concept faster once you've seen what the quarterback is doing. Tighten all of that up, right? And just like on both sides of the ball, stuff is just slow and clunky as people are hesitating and thinking and taking a minute to process. Mental reps is, I think, a good thing there. Brucein says, convince me that we have any chance to make noise in the playoffs. I get any given Sunday, but it seems this defense can't stop anyone semi-decent. Defense is going to be a problem in the playoffs, of course. But hey, the offense is going to be a problem in the playoffs in a more positive way of saying that. They're going to be like a problem. Especially if you get like the Seahawks, who have just as many defensive problems right now. Or if you get, you could face Daniel Jones or Taylor Heineke. You could get the Lions again. The Vikings if they're going to be a 2 seed, they're getting the 7th seeded team. So you're not seeing right away. The NFC is not sending their best in the 7th seed. All right. So the Vikings are probably favored in that. So when you say like any given Sunday, well, that would be an upset, right? And this is what I struggle so much to reconcile the idea. A lot of people say, the Vikings feel like such a one and done kind of team. Well, that implies like a wild card traveling and then just like breaking on one of the real playoff teams. But we don't play the real playoff teams yet. So 2 and done. Okay, then you could do that. But does that count as making noise? You made it to the divisional round, right? You won a playoff game. Is that making noise? Or do you have to make it all the way to the NFC Championship to make noise? Or do you have to make it all the way to the Super Bowl to make noise? Hey, do they make it to the NFC Championship? I don't know, but they seem likely enough to be a game away from that. And I don't know. They beat the Bills. They have clearly shown the capability to beat good teams. They beat the Patriots, who are in playoff position right now. They beat the Jets, who would be in playoff position were it not for the Patriots. I don't know. I think that they've proven an ability to play against good teams a lot, and even against some of the high-flying offenses of the league. Matthias asked, how do they beat the 49ers or Cowboys or Eagles? When it comes to the 49ers and Cowboys, I think watching that Cowboys tape, there was, I think, more to build off of than it looked like. And I don't know if the Cowboys would think that. I think the Cowboys go, man, we kicked their butts. Let's just run that game plan back, right? And I think the Vikings would be able to change a lot. Maybe you could catch them in something. The 49ers, I have no idea what to make of them right now. Come back to me when I have seen more than one game of Brock Purdy. The Bucs are falling apart, right? But there's also a chance, hey, those guys have to win their wild card matchups too. And if we're looking at the Vikings and saying, I don't know if they beat the Seahawks with home field advantage, well, Dallas has to travel to Tampa and play Tom Brady, right? That's no given. So let's all wait for all that stuff to play out. This is why I hate speculating on this stuff, because it's ultimately, I am not going to, this is let's redo. Brucein asks, convince me that we have any chance to make noise in the playoffs. Again, any given Sunday, but this defense can't stop anyone. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go that hard at you. They're going to be the 2 seed, man. What do you mean by noise in the playoffs? I guess would be my question there. If you mean, can they win a playoff game? Well, they're going to be in the 2-7 game. So they're probably going to be favored in that game. So, I don't know. You say any given Sunday. I say any given Sunday for the other team that's going to be the underdogs, right? Is to say you made noise, do you have to make the NFC Championship? Can we only say 4 teams made noise in the playoffs every year? If that's the case, yeah, that's a little harder, right? You got to beat 49ers or Dallas or Eagles or one of those like harder teams to make it to the Super Bowl. You probably have to go through 2 of those teams. But here's where I'm going to be on this kind of thing are the Vikings a one and done team? It's really hard for me to predict that they will be a one and done team because I don't know who they're playing. I can't predict the outcome of a game when I don't know who's playing in it. And I think if people are like, they're a one and done team, you're out of here. Don't even pay attention. They're just going to get knocked out right away in the playoffs. I don't know how you predicted the future on who they're even playing, but man, with that confidence, you should go to Bet Online and you should go bet that the Vikings will lose a wild card game if you can find a prop like that. Because boy, if you've got all that confidence, why don't you just go put a little money on it and we'll see how it goes down, right? That's what I did. I said, under 8.5, I put money on it. I lost my money. That's fair. That's the way the game goes, right? But I refuse to predict the outcome of a playoff game when I do not know who is playing in it. That should be common sense. Skull Squatch says onside kicks don't work very often. Rather than the typical kick where the kicker tries to get the ball to bounce favorably, has a kicker ever just tried to kick it as hard as they can on a line at the group of players on the receiving team? Okay, so you're talking like you're just going to bean someone in the face with it and then hope it bounces off of them to create the onside that way. I think if that worked, it would work once. Because you'd have to catch someone off guard for that. Remember, this is the hands team on an onside kick. They're sending out their people who are used to catching bullets from NFL quarterbacks. So a kick that comes at them quickly, they probably can still catch, or at the very least, knock it out of bounds or something like that. But there may be a chance for you to catch somebody off guard and have that work once. It's also a very difficult kick. How much do we trust Greg Joseph's kick accuracy? Because otherwise you're just beaning that thing out of bounds and you never had a shot at it. But hey, onside kicks are in such a bad way right now. I'm certainly open to innovations. Best dad jokes is the last one I'll do today. Says, on a previous show, you mentioned that Kirk had an issue with overcocking his shoulders on intermediate routes, causing them to sail. Previous years, he seemed to have issues with batted balls by D-line and linebackers, and it seems to have been addressed this year. With these points in mind, is it possible that this is an intentional correction that has been made that has thrown off Kirk's accuracy? Yeah, I like that theory. That kind of makes sense. That you're just trying to get a little bit more air under it, and now he's struggling to kind of figure out his touch again. That could totally be the case. And we've seen quarterbacks go through these kind of chapters where suddenly they're just inaccurate for a little bit. Tom Brady had it in 2020, if you want an example. We saw it with Breeze for a while. As quarterbacks get old, they have to do a similar kind of thing where suddenly they don't have the power and they have to reconfigure how they approach their accuracy, and then it eventually evens out. I could see it being something like that. Yeah, maybe. I also could be super wrong about why those throws are sailing. A QB expert should probably check me on that. So who knows? But yeah, seems like as good a theory as any. Tomorrow, I'll talk about the defense. I sort of dodged the defense questions because I'm sort of saving that whole thing for tomorrow. What's wrong with this unit? Why can't they, can they fix it? Is it scheme or personnel and all that stuff? But for now, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, and I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.